Thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome back to WAMS Webinar Wednesdays. My name is Ashley Lopp, Marketing Manager at WAMS, and today I'm joined by Phil and JT from Sonicwall, our longtime security partner, and they will be covering best practices for securing a remote or hybrid workforce. Sonicwall has been fighting cyber criminals for over 30 years now and protects more than 1 million networks in over 215 countries. As a global leader in network security and remote connectivity, they block 28 million attacks daily and secure hundreds of thousands of remote users. Many of our clients are using Sonicwall already for an important layer of added security, and we have been working with Sonicwall for many years. For any of you unfamiliar, I'll share a little about us. We've been around since 1974. We work with small businesses and law firms, and we do specialize in IT for the legal industry. We keep our agreements friendly and always approach contracts with a win-win philosophy. Our team is comprised of experts with certifications in every platform we work with, and as always, WAMS is dedicated to the success of our clients. At WAMS, we take great pride in the partnerships we've formed over the years and like to align ourselves with industry leaders such as Sonicwall. With that, I'm going to pass it on to JT.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Let's pop over to this little thing. Just to confirm, we do have the screen shared currently, correct? Perfect. I'll assume that that's a yes.
Yeah, we're good to go.
So, okay, good. I just want to triple check. I'll always see check. Otherwise, I get on a rambling stage. So, my name is JT Fanning. I'm what's called the sales engineer for Southern California for Sonicwall. Today, I'll talk pretty high level and pretty just direct towards the state of the security that Sonicwall published and what we've made available as data. And then we'll talk about some ways that you can maybe address some of those concerns, as well as we'll talk about specific Sonicwall products that address those concerns at the very end. So the first, a little bit of this is just going to be educational and general question answer style content. I'll do my best to I think we're going to leave questions towards the end, but if you do have a question, ask it and put it in chat so that we can be sure we address it. So without further ado, here we go. So I always like to start with just some current events, some current news, some current topics. A big one that I would call out is anybody with on-prem Exchange servers. There is some recent developments as far as security breaches in that space. Those are an area that attackers are targeting very heavily, mostly because email is used by more or less everybody and is a fairly easy way to compromise systems. The other thing is I've seen a pretty substantial increase in ransomware. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And the last thing is, if you don't hear about it enough, Bitcoin is at close to 60,000 bucks. I pulled that data this morning. And we've seen a huge increase in what's called cryptojacking, where people compromise your systems, your servers, your workstations, your mobile devices, to get them to basically try to mine for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin in a way to make revenue. So they're not really directly attacking you, but they are using your resources for nefarious activities. For those of you that don't know, we do publish a cyber threat report. Our most recent one just came out. It is free to access. You can gain valuable security data off of it. This is a snapshot of just the big trends that we've seen right now. So again, I mentioned cryptojacking is up. For those of you that aren't aware, that's the ability to compromise your machine and mine for cryptocurrencies. We've seen a substantial increase in ransomware attacks. That's typically a big topic for a lot of customers. That's typically what most of customers experience as a very painful and very challenging moment in cybersecurity. It's when your data is prevented from being accessed and you are forced to pay a ransom, hence the name ransomware, which is typically in the form of a cryptocurrency or some other untraceable currency. It can be very impactful to business. Typically, they'll lock up your accounting databases or your financial mechanisms or your critical business data and demand payment. And another thing that we've seen as a trend in that space is like a double ransom, where they make you pay for your data just to get it back, and they also make you pay to not publish your data. And we'll talk about why that might be important here in the future. We did see a decrease in malware attacks, which is good. Part of what we've seen in that space is that there the attackers are using less and less different types of malware and more sophisticated versions of it. So they're looking to try to subvert what would be considered more traditional security. I would say easier to bypass security maybe in some ways, or just non-updated security platforms. It wouldn't be a webinar without me mentioning COVID-19, right? But the reason I bring it up is actually just to really indicate from our data what it looks like to see a surge in malware attacks right around last year when all the COVID news went out. For many of our customers, whenever there's a very high button news topic or a very prominent news story, right? Elections, we've got taxes coming up here shortly here in the US. I think most everyone on the call is from the US, but we've got tax season coming up relatively shortly. COVID-19 was a huge one. Anytime there's a news article, malicious attackers use those sources to try to infiltrate networks by sending out fake things, right? Like, here's the 10 people that were affected with COVID in your neighborhood, and they're trying to get you to click on a link. And I mean, that's somewhat simplified, but they use those news articles to really generate activity. And that's why we see this growing trend of malware into that February, March timeframe of last year. It probably comes as no surprise to many of you, but the top 10 US states, California leads the way by a pretty wide margin on number of malware attacks. A big piece of that is that we are here in a very highly dense population. There's a lot of industry, a lot of business that goes on, and we are the tech kind of center for the US, at least, for the most part. Northern California kind of viewed Silicon Valley as that big area, but also the risk and the ability to gain access to people's information is higher here, right? If you think about the types of individuals that are in California, if you think about the access that certain things like might have, specifically like restaurant databases or law firm databases. I know many of you are a service-driven company. You might have very sensitive data about individuals that have, in some cases, more resources than other states. And so we see a big impact of malware in specifically our state of California, and then obviously New York, very similar story over there, population density and just overall industry, Texas, Michigan, Florida, down the list. Top data breaches for 2020. I will list these. I'm not going to read through all of them. You guys can read them. I put this up because a lot of people tend to like slough off these things, right? Like, oh, whatever, right? Like, I don't use Marriott. I'm a Hilton person. Or, I don't use Facebook. I'm off Facebook. Or what does it matter if Facebook got hacked, right? They're $1 billion company. They can handle it. Like, no big deal. And what we'll talk about towards the midsection of this is the need for two-factor authentication and why the explosion of people working from home causes a lot of risk, even in these situations. Unfortunately, a lot of individuals use very similar passwords or the same password for many platforms. They typically have one or two email addresses that they use. So when you see things like Facebook get breached, or you see things like Marriott International get breached, you see things like Zoom get breached, typically they're going to be able to gather corporate email addresses, right? Especially for Marriott. A lot of people use that for corporate travel pre-pandemic, and a password associated with it. Now, hopefully they have a password that's difficult to guess, but if not, these breaches, while they have no impact really on our day-to-day lives, they have a pretty severe impact on overall security posture of companies. And so this is my caution, I guess, is just that be aware of this, be active. If you are part of this breach, like Google does a pretty good job of alerting you, like, hey, you have compromised passwords. Just be aware of why that's important. Even if you don't use these services, there's tangentially you could be affected by them. And we're seeing this trend grow. I mean, I talked to quite a few of our customers, and I think for the most part, people are going to be wanting to do a work from home, at least in some hybrid deployment. Even when we have a concept of the ability to go back, right? We've got a lot of really good momentum as far as people returning to a more normal, lives, normal, if we want to call it that, into the next year or so. Well, with that, there's going to be a good majority of the population that still works remotely. And so remote access has always been something that's interesting. And I think we got a spur to grow that space and grow that activity of remotely connecting a user to a network. But we're going to even see that become more prevalent because that's now an expectation, or people saw the benefits of it. Employees saw the benefits of it, and more employees are going to be asking for that moving forward. So know that there is solutions for that. If you're a person or a organization on the phone now that is currently working from home or working remotely, but you are unhappy with the experience, chances are there is ways to improve that experience or drastically make it a better end user experience. And so when you're thinking about, hey, how can my employees connect? How can they be more efficient? How can we save money? Good chance that there's a way to improve that remote work experience. Probably comes to no surprise to any of you here because we're all on a webinar right now, but we saw a huge spike in obviously Zoom, Google Meets, this GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar style presentations, and a big explosion of ways that people transfer files. And so another thing to think about is, how is your organization currently securing file transfers? Some people aren't working remotely, or they are working very limited remotely, but they're transferring files in afternoon hours to other devices. So how do you secure that data? How do you verify the integrity of that data? And is there a risk to your company if that was malicious, right? If ransomware was delivered in that mechanism, do you have a way of scanning or stopping it? I'll build this slide out and we'll kind of talk about three things that I hear very often from our customers. One, hey, I need to allow my employees to work from home. This was certainly true 7 months ago, right? It was like everyone had to work from home. It was part of the state requirements. We're seeing more and more people be able to work in some hybrid capacity. But the second thing is, I need to be able to be quick and deploy this at scale, right? Maybe I need to do this for 50 employees today, but I might need to do it for 100 tomorrow. Or maybe only 5 of my employees are right now, but if someone in my office gets COVID, I need to be able to work from home all over. So it can't be a slow process of rolling out. Like, how do we quickly expand or contract that user, the remote user experience? And then I mentioned it again, I'm going to say it like 15 different times, maintain data security, right? We've got all these people connecting from their home. They're using maybe a corporate device. Maybe they're just using their home computer. How are we securing that device? How are we making sure that that device is protected and that they have at least the same experience that they would have behind the corporate network? I will call out two-factor authentication 5 times on this. First time will be right now. Use two-factor authentication everywhere you can. Your bank account probably forces you to do it. If it doesn't, turn it on. Your Instagram account or your TikTok account or any of the social media platforms, you should use it there. And it goes to the concept that the fewer ways that someone can access your information, the better secure you are as a whole. As people start to be able to compromise your Instagram account or your TikTok account, they can then use that to look for other holes in your own personal life. And the same is true for your business, right? Your least secured user, whoever's like the worst at clicking on every box that ever pops up, the worst security focused person in your company is really your largest risk at this point, right? So if that's you, try to be more mindful of it. If it's someone else on your team or your company in your organization, how do you help enable that person to not be the biggest risk, right? What are ways that we can back them out? One big one is two-factor authentication. Just the thought of something else prompting you to verify you want to log into something can cause someone to think about it. More importantly, if your credentials do get compromised, the prompt of a two-factor authentication alerts you, the end user, that something malicious is happening. So please turn that on. Encourage your friends and family to do it. It's a really big step to helping the security market as a whole be more effective. This is from a messaging board, but ransomware actors are licking their lips at hastily put up RDP instances. If you are not aware, if you're a business owner, if you're a party owner of an organization, which I assume you are for getting on this call, if you are not aware in the method at which people connect to your infrastructure and transfer files at your business, you should ask. You should just be aware of how do we do it, right? Hey, how do we connect? And don't let them just say over VPN. Just understand how it's done. Okay, what does that look like? You currently connect from a client from your laptop to a firewall, and it's secured that way. That's pretty good. I feel comfortable with that. If you talk to your internal IT person, or you talk to a provider you might have, or you're asking, and the answer is not clear, that's a pretty big question that you'd want to patch up, right? You need to have those answers. That's something that I think a lot of people take for granted in IT security, right? If nothing's broken, it's probably fine. If everything's working, it's okay. And in reality, there is a very critical question there, which is just an understanding of how are my users currently connecting? How are all of my employees accessing my corporate data? Because for many of you on the call, if you lost access to that corporate data, you would potentially lose a good portion of your revenue and certainly a couple nights worth of sleep. So to know just how it's secured is very important. I find out way too often that large companies, large businesses, large organizations, the owners, the executives, the people making decisions and signing checks, they don't understand the ramifications, and it is not very well explained from IT to the ownership why there's a need there. So be sure that you as the owner or stakeholder is just asking and is aware of how that's done, because that's probably the biggest thing. That two-factor authentication is probably the easiest thing to set up that will cause the biggest difference and it costs the least of all the stuff. So just verify it. Okay, enough on that. How many of you guys have something that looks like this at your house, or maybe like this? How many have seen that pop up? A lot of people do, right? I did home network security for a long time when I was in college. Every single person buys one of those Linksys, Netgear, Nighthawk, whatever they are, routers. They put them at their house to get wireless for them and their kids, and then they never touch them. Well, in corporate IT, in enterprise IT, you're updating and constantly patching against security vulnerabilities. Those devices have patches, and they were certainly never deployed. So when your employees are working remotely from home, they are a huge security risk to your organization, especially given what sort of access they have. Moreover, all of your contractors and the people that you're working with that are connecting to your network or connecting to your data are connecting probably from something very similar in a lot of cases. So when you think about why security has changed over this past year, it really should be the move away from being on-prem in your protected shell to these very disparate, weird areas where you might have significant security issues. So my advice would be, in a best case scenario, put a firewall at every customer's house and connect them that way. Practically, that doesn't get deployed very often. It might be too costly for your organization. So a more practical solution would be securing the end-point device, securing the computer or the laptop, the iPad, whatever it might be. And if possible, asking your employees that are working from home to check for the updates. There's no way to enforce the updates on those remote devices if you aren't managing them or you aren't allowing WAMS or someone like WAMS to manage them. But I would certainly suggest that you at least encourage your employees to update those home devices, maybe just a quick email. So here's if you're going to push that take a screenshot button, I think that I saw earlier, this might not be a bad screenshot to do, because this could be like a checklist of things that you could do today that would give you a very nice leg up on just how to go about maintaining your security. And they're really just generic questions that you can ask either to your provider or to your IT team, but it's like, hey, how are we protecting against malware? Do we have upgraded next generation AV on our client devices, right? Or are we using a really old version of Norton that no one's checked on in 3 years, right? Who's managing our antivirus? Are we updating our computers and our browsers, right? Am I on the latest version of the Mac OS? Maybe, maybe not. Am I on the latest version of Windows OS? If you don't know or you don't have a process for that, that should be something that's considered. Most of those you're probably already paying for it or are not. They don't cost anything. They're just a time allocation. So you should be doing those. The next question is really, how do I protect against phishing and business email compromise? Talking to our customers, very often they say, I get an email that says, that looks like it's from my accounting person and says, hey, wire me $1,500 because I need this done today, or $15,000 because this needs to be done today. Or it looked like our CEO was emailing me asking for this money, but when I called him, he wasn't. If you are bumping into things that look suspicious, emails that are coming across that are pretty convincing, or you're having issues where someone's sending out emails on your behalf that you haven't approved or sent, you've got an issue, first of all, and secondly, that's going to fall into that category. So how do we protect against phishing? How do I protect against business email compromise? Sometimes it's abbreviated as BEC. I would say you need a security solution in the cloud. If you're working with WAMS, they use a fantastic product called Mimecast. They also have access to an additional layer security product that we have called CAS, and we'll talk about that towards the end. Second thing is, I'm going to say it, this is my second time saying it, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. Your Office 365 account, your Gmail account, your Hotmail account, your whatever email you have, it needs to have two-factor authentication turned on to it. Just do it. It's time to do it. The third question is, how are we protecting the home network? We mentioned how there's some risk associated with someone working remotely, a risk with their device. What are you doing to isolate that user, right? If one of your employees is working from home, how do you ensure that they don't have a kid that loads a Fortnite skin onto their computer and messes up your environment? Or Roblox is also on the same computer that's connecting to your corporate environment. Like, what sort of access does that person have, and how granular do you need to control that? We talked about VPN technology. We talked about not opening up the RDP ports just wide open. So how are you connecting those users? And then ultimately just protecting your corporate network. How do we do it, right? Do we do any sort of device check? Is there any way for us to verify that the above is being done? Do we have a way of making sure that that happens before someone connects to our network? Maybe, maybe not. If you do, that's great. If you don't, it's probably something you'd like to consider. So I want to verify that someone has an updated operating system before they connect to my network. That might be something that's worth looking into. I do like to pull this up because I think email compromise is one of our biggest threat vectors. It's still the #1 way that networks get compromised. Even people that invest, thousands and millions of dollars into security, email is still the #1 way. And part of it's because people make an assumption that, like, well, I would never fall for that phishing email that says click here because whatever. But I'll tell a story that I learned when I was traveling to Hawaii before all of the COVID stuff. There was a CIO, and he was working late one weekend. Saturday, he couldn't go to his child's soccer game. It was like their first game or whatever. The child scores a goal at the soccer game. Gets home, finds out his kid scored a game. His wife is blowing him up on Facebook, right? Like, giving him a hard time. Hey, I can't believe my husband had to work late, missed my son's first goal at soccer. It's so ridiculous, blah, 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 blah. A hacker that wanted to get into their network saw this Facebook thing using social engineering, kind of looked at that and went, oh, this is the way I can get him to click on a link. Sent an email that looked like it was from someone internal at that CIO's company that said, hey, I was at the soccer game and I caught your son's first goal. Here's the video link. I mean, when you think about that, it's pretty hard not to click on that link. And so the reason I bring these slides up and I show these is because these things are pretty convincing, right? How many of you have seen this and just typed your password in? Maybe you looked at the URL, but transparently, I might not have, right? Maybe you see something like this. Oh, I have 23 undelivered messages. What's going on? Well, of course, no one's emailing me today. I've been slammed, right? Click on it. Boom, loads up. You type your password in. Now your email is compromised. So how are you protecting against those? And even if you are super security minded and you would never make this mistake, maybe someone at your company would. And so how are you protecting your end users and helping them have some guardrails, right? Again, we do so many logins and there's so many passwords nowadays. Like, if this is your email address, you might just click and log in. And I just show the sophistication of the way it looks, right? It's evolved quite a bit. If you look at 2018, that's one on the left looks pretty janky. You might not fall for it. The one on the right looks pretty good. I mean, it looks exactly like the notification I get from Microsoft that when my password changed. And I'm like, oh crap, I didn't change my password. I need to go in here and edit it. And every one of these hyperlinks on this email will send you to a place that will compromise your password by typing it in. So you click this unsubscribe because you're like, this is fake. I don't want this. You click unsubscribe, it loads it up and says, hey, you just need to verify your Microsoft account before leaving. And there you go. One big thing that we hear a lot from our service companies, architects, law firms, accounting departments, is that Office documents are kind of their number one thing, right? Microsoft Word, PDF, just different types of Office Exchange document types, Excel files. And it turns out last year, explosion in malicious stuff hiding in those. That's kind of a way of delivering malicious payloads. So as people are working from home, a big consideration is like, if I need to share a Office document with my peer, how can I make sure that that's safe when they download it? How can I make sure that it's not malicious when I download it? And we have a solution for that spot. We'll talk about it in a second. I'm going to take a drink of water and build this slide out. So Ashley mentioned at the beginning, Sonicwall, 30 years of cybersecurity, network security appliances, what would be considered a firewall or a unified threat management device, basically the core of every business network when it's physical and it's like on an on-premise location, is our core business. We've been doing that for 30 years. We also provide security across a portfolio of products. And on my conversation today, I really mentioned 3 areas that are worth highlighting. Mobile access, right? How do I remote users connect? Cloud access. How do I secure things like Office 365 email? How do I secure things like Dropbox or Box, Google Drive? And then the last thing is endpoints. When my employees are working remotely, how am I securing that remote device? Okay, as a forward, this is the part where I'm talking about Sonicwall Products. So if there's something in here that is interesting to you, if there's a part of your network that you're aware of that's like, maybe this is something we need to evaluate, I will talk about the problem it solves and the product's name so that you can email your team at WAMS, and we can set up maybe a follow-up call that's like, hey, I was on the webinar, I heard about, not being able to remotely connect. I would like to talk about SMA, and that really helps just speed up the process for you and for us, transparently. So SMA stands for Secure Mobile Access, and it really does these 5 things. It allows your people to connect from anywhere, at any time, securely. You can give them limited or full access, so you can control the level of access a person might have. So if you have different groups of people, like executive team, sales team, remote contractors, you can give each one of those people different access to resources. You can enable multi-factor authentication for those remote users, and you can do it to either cloud or on-premise locations. So if you're moving some stuff to a platform like Azure or AWS, or you have a hybrid environment today, we have the ability to deploy into those environments with the Secure Mobile Access appliance. We do have what is called the Sonicwall Capture client. This would replace your McAfee. This would replace your Nortons of the world. This would be a substitute for things like Cylance or SentinelOne. This is a solution to secure that remote user. If I have a corporate laptop that is at a house, you can do things like block malware right there at the corporate level. You can do things like make sure they don't plug a USB stick into a corporate device and offload information. You can do things like control content filtering, right? Make sure that they don't accidentally navigate to an inappropriate site during work hours or an inappropriate site at all, depending on how much control you need. If you're an education customer or you provide some sort of service to people and you allow them to have a laptop, sometimes there's requirements, state requirements around how you control what content they have access to. And so this tool can give you access to do that while also doing the virus scanning and prevention for you. We talked about email security, and so we have a platform called Cloud Application Security, CAS, C-A-S, and it solves the 5 topics below. Protecting email, which we mentioned is the #1 threat vector. protecting against compromise of your credentials. So if you're using Office 365, you get one of those spam emails that I showed earlier, or your employees get one of those spam emails that I showed earlier, and it pops up and they accidentally type in their credentials, because it happens. I've personally done it, and I'm a security-minded person, but I've personally done it before. So it pops up, they type it in. How do you protect your environment against that? And this tool can do that. We can protect against phishing, right? Someone just trying to get some money extorted from your organization. We scan for malware. We also do anti-social engineering detection on there. And then we add on the benefit of being able to do data leak or data loss prevention with DLP, right? Maybe you have sensitive legal information, you don't want to send that out, or you want to restrict it. Someone accidentally attaches a list of all of your clients to an email, or purposefully attaches a list of all of your clients to an email, right? Disgruntled employee or something, and tries to send it out. What sort of protections do you have to make sure that file doesn't go somewhere it shouldn't? Or what if they accidentally try to upload it to the internet? Or again, deliberate is more common than accidental, but both happen. What sort of guardrails or controls do you have that can help you be PCI compliant, HIPAA compliant, DFARS compliant, or just general security, right? Maybe you don't want to send out resumes. There's a way to control it. So just to recap, Sonicwall, 30 years in business, protecting against malware, protecting against ransomware. I think that's kind of concludes my general slideshow on air webinar content. I will look at the chat now, and if there's questions, love to kind of hear from you guys, get some feedback. If you'd like me to dive into something specific, chances are other people have that same question. So I'll open it up at this time for that, and I'll pop up in the chat. Okay, I think I see the chat. Looks like there's currently no questions unless I don't see them actively. There's a question of how do you pronounce Philip's last name?
I'm seeing one here. It says, if we wanted to use cloud app security, what is the process?
Yeah, so cloud application security can be accessed a couple different ways. If you'd like to add it onto your, say, Office 365 account, first thing I would suggest is just email your WAMS team so that they are aware and they can support you and they can loop us in if needed. But if you want to just do it, if you're kind of a on your own, figure it out yourself kind of person, online on mysonicwall.com, like our website, you can actually access a 30-day trial for up to 25 mailboxes. And one of the cool things about cloud application security is it actually will not impact your business mail flow. It won't go in between. You can just have it like in a monitor mode. So you can get an idea of what sort of stuff your current solution may be not solving for. And then you can decide whether the product's the correct fit for you. But certainly, engaging with your WAMS team would be my first step, but there is the self-service aspect of it as well if you're interested.
Awesome. Looks like another one came through. It says we currently have a TZ500. Is that model still current?
Yeah. So TZ500 is our core firewall. It's what's called our Gen 6 firewall. That's our network security appliance, kind of the key piece there. So yes, it's currently active. However, we do have our Gen 7 products out, which will be the latest and greatest. They handle higher throughput. They're just better for like long-term growth of your company. So when your renewal comes up, or if your renewal's like now, verify that you have services on it, because we do have a services license. If you need to renew, it's certainly probably time to look at upgrading that product. So anyone with a like TZ500, TZ600, TZ400 should look towards that upgrade process. And we have some really attractive promotions, I think, that are going on around upgrading. So it should be pretty easy. I think in some cases, like the upgrade is the same price as what a renewal would cost. So even if you guys are on this call and you're like, hey, nothing else, none of this other stuff pertains to me, it might be worth just checking where you're at in your renewal cycle, because you might be able to upgrade to a latest and greatest, better throughput product and not have too much change in cost from a renewal. So yeah, thanks for that question there, Ashley.
Absolutely. I'm seeing another one here. How do you protect against the China Chopper web shell?
China Chopper web shell. I don't know that specific vulnerability. However, we do publish, like if you're a subscriber to Sonicwall, there's a couple things you can do. You can look through our security database on your My Sonicwall account. If you'd like to send an email to Ashley or myself, I can follow it up and verify that specific vulnerability, but you can also search them on our security database. So that would be the number one way I would look. I would assume you're talking about at the network security level, in which case most of that will come through an automated update on the firewalls. So you'll automatically be protected against those vulnerabilities, but I would need to look up the exact vulnerability just to verify that's what I'm saying. But most of the time it'll just come through on an automated update from Sonicwall, and you can apply, you don't have to apply it, but you could, if you are looking to specifically block that on your network or a specific use case for that, you can look it up and verify that it's part of your security package.
Okay, and we've got another one here. Are the Gen 7 products a software upgrade or a hardware replacement, or both for the TZ series devices?
Yep, great question. It's both. It's a new piece of hardware with a new, not really new, but like revitalized OS. So we refreshed our operating system. It's just modernized. It's easier to navigate, in my opinion, on it from a UI perspective. It has some additional feature functionality, concepts of like SD-WAN inside of it, load balancing built in, and just general security profiles, like kind of organized in a little bit different way. But it's the same core product, same core security features. To get to Gen 7 is both a hardware upgrade and a software upgrade.
Okay, great. It looks like we have one more question here. What is the best way to connect 35 remote employees?
Yeah, it's right on the cusp of what I would say is probably where you would want to draw the line on connecting to your firewall. So I didn't mention this in the webinar, but when you're connecting remote employees, you can terminate people to a firewall, which is called a VPN, right? Client to site VPN. You can terminate them to a SMA device, which I did mention, which is a standalone appliance that does just strictly connections. And then you can also terminate them to a platform that we have in the cloud. So if you're like, hey, I don't want to manage an on-prem device, the firewall doesn't meet my needs, I want some really cool feature functionality, Sonicwall provides an as-a-service offering, like a SaaS offering, that will allow you to connect to a cloud repository and then go down to your infrastructure. And 35 is like kind of right at the limit where you'll want to move away from doing it on the firewall. So I would say, plus or minus 20 remote employees, you're getting out of the range of what would be a VPN that would want to connect to the TZ500 or TZ600 firewall. And you would want to move to either a SMA appliance, which gives you a little bit more control and a lot more overhead room just for better usability, like faster throughputs, faster download speeds, less latency, or when you feel like the stuttering or the lag on the connection. Or, so SMA or the cloud edge platform is what we have, and is a hosted or managed remote access platform. So 35 is like right there on that cusp. So probably worth the conversation. Less than 20, the firewall is probably fine for you, and more than 35 or more than 30, you probably want to look at an SMA at minimum. Great question.
All right, and I think that is all of the questions, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you think of any questions after the fact, you can go ahead and email us at info@wamsinc.com, and we'll get back to you very quickly. Thank you all again for joining us today, and a special thank you to JT and Phil for teaching us all about how Sonicwall helps us keep you safe while working remotely. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Ashley, thanks everyone.